Hi. I am sitting out on my back porch. It is really late at night, and I'm just trying to try to get this video done. Um, I was talking earlier today about the authority structures within a marriage and the importance of recognizing these authority structures and keeping them intact and respecting the authority structures that God intends for our marriage and our family life. So, in the previous videos, I touched on a little bit about how authority structure is very important to Catholics. Like, this is a huge teaching in the Catholic Church. Um, and it's something that people who are raised Catholic, that are raised in a solid Catholic formation, they understand the importance of authority and how that plays out in our culture and our society. Um, in a marriage, authority plays a huge role in the general maintenance of a household and the way that families function. And it is sort of part of the right ordering of families and right ordering of your life. Authority would be the physical structures within a family that dictate kind of like the chain of command. Okay. So if you imagine that your family is a ship, the father would be the captain of that ship and the wife would be the first mate. And the captain of the ship is going to be the one who sees the direction that the family is going in and enforces that direction. Okay. So he is going to have sort of the overall mission of the family in his head at all times. This should be at the forefront of every decision a man makes for his family. Is this decision that I am making a good decision for the spiritual formation of my wife and the spiritual formation of my children? Am I helping my wife get into heaven? Am I helping my children get into heaven? So that needs to always be in the back of the mind of a captain of his family or the captain of a ship, right? So the captain of a ship, he doesn't make moves. He doesn't take a course that is dangerous, right? So he's going to get his ship to wherever they're going the safest way possible. But he's also not going to take like the longest way possible. So he might take a couple of risks that, like along the way, he's not going to be too super cautious, but he's going to be cautious enough that everybody's going to get to their destination. Okay, and so if I want you to keep this idea of the captain of the ship in mind when we talk about authority structures and how spouses tend to undermine each other's authority structure. So, in the last video, I talked about an attitude of respect as more of a kind of the way that people speak to each other within a marriage and the way that husbands and wives, the way that they back each other up in sort of the air of respect. And in this video, I'm going to talk more about the actual physical disrespect that people engage in when it comes to disobeying house rules and undermining each other's authority when it comes to the actual movement of their children. In a marriage, no one in a Catholic marriage is called to obey another Catholic. There aren't those vows in Catholic marriages to my knowledge. In England, specifically, there was, in the old English vows, the wives had to honor and obey their husbands. But that, to my knowledge, was more of this was more about wives handing their dowries over to their husbands than it was a Christian duty to obey. And so, yes, wives are called to be subjected to their husbands and they're called to submit to their husbands. So that doesn't mean that they have to obey their husbands in like a commandment, if that makes sense. And so within a marriage, we're not saying that the husband is the authority figure, like when he says, go in the kitchen and do X, Y, Z. Like that's not how that works. I mean, of course, you can ask nicely for dinner or whatever, but like it's not, you're not under some obligation to obey your husband's every whim within a marriage. There are a few obligations that we could talk about later, but obeying your husband's every desire is not part of Catholic marriage. And so when we're talking about, though, kind of, I hate to use that word obey because it sounds like I'm saying that people have to obey each other in marriage. But when there are rules that your spouse wants to implement for the children and the other spouse does not, or when there are house rules that people disagree about, it's never a good idea to openly subvert your spouse. Okay. I see this a lot in, I hate to say this, but I see this quite a bit actually coming from men in the marriage, whereas the women, I would say in general, tend towards a disrespectful speech pattern. Men will engage in disrespect in a physical way. And what I mean by that is men will subvert their wife's authority over her children and sometimes subvert her authority over the house in a general way, like the cleanliness of the house or like the rules that she has in place. Um, and it's not to say that the wife is necessarily the arbiter of all things that happen in the home. Like the wife is not necessarily the person that decides all of the rules at home, but because she is generally the caretaker of the home, and husbands should probably pay attention to the rules that she tries to implement when it comes to, house rules. Okay. So I'm going to get into that a little bit because I don't want people to be offended. About what I'm talking about today, because I'm a little worried about talking about this. I'm not going to lie, because I think like a lot of men are going to maybe take this the wrong way. And I'm not trying to accuse men of being like subversive of their wives or anything like that. But like, I really want people to think about this and take a look at your own marriage and how you're acting. Okay. So what happens in a marriage often is that this is a pretty common scenario. A man meets a really fun, carefree wife, and she's super cute, and she likes to date, and she's really physically affectionate, and they get married and they have kids, and suddenly his wife turns into a total banshee who is like uber uptight and has a lot of anxiety around child rearing, and maybe has like some crazy ideas about child safety and things like that. Okay. And she might get really uptight about keeping the house clean. She might get really anxious about doing the laundry, and she might be really anxious about her social status within her community and like, what do the other moms think about her? Okay. And the husband is sort of sitting there thinking to himself, he's like, girl, like, you're freaking out over nothing. Like, nothing bad's going to happen. Like, the house is fine. Who cares what those ladies down the street think about you? And like, nobody cares. Okay. So you just need to relax. All right. Because husbands and most men in a relationship tend to be a little bit conflict averse. And I'm going to say men tend to be conflict averse more than women, because I think men see conflict as something that you engage in like warfare or in some sort of like weird competitive battle among other men. Men do not generally like to get into conflicts with women. And I'm going to like just in general, I don't think very many men enjoy getting into fights with women, arguments or heated discussions or anything like that. They tend to pretty much shy away from conflict. And I would say even with my sons versus my daughters, like if my sons will totally disobey me, but they almost never verbally try to disagree with me. And they're little, but like, my 7-year-old son might think I'm being crazy, but like he might not do what I tell him to do, but he's not going to come back and like give me a 10-point presentation about why I'm wrong, like a 7-year-old little girl will do, in my experience. Okay, that's my family. I'm not trying to make any, broad sweeping statements about gender. But men, generally speaking, do not enjoy conflict in their marriages. And this can create some major issues, because not only do they not like conflict, they also don't want to have a stressed out, nervous wife who is anxious and bossy and kind of rude and disrespectful towards them. Okay. So if you have an anxious, stressed out, bossy, rude, overly uptight wife, I hate to tell you this, but there's going to be a little bit of conflict, because you're going to have to address that. And you're going to have to address that as the captain of a ship whose first mate is acting crazy. Okay. That's just how it is. What I see happen instead of addressing that is that men start to undermine their wives in their own homes. Okay. So this can take two forms. One, actually, well, I mean, I guess it could take three, but like the two most common ones that I see is the man who decides he's going to become fun dad, and he's going to come home and bond with his children and do fun thing with his children and not include his wife in any of the fun. And one of the ways that he's going to have fun with the kids is by allowing them to break all sorts of rules that their mean, uptight mom puts in place. I have seen this dynamic among men I know. I've seen this dynamic in, men that might be a part of my family. I have seen this is a dynamic that definitely exists. This sort of goofy, fun dad who sees his wife as his second grade teacher who is undermining or who is, being a killjoy. Okay. Now, it could be true that your wife is a killjoy, and that could be a big problem, and it could be that you need to help her lighten up a little bit. But the way that you're going to do that is not by subverting her authority, because when you do that, you're doing a couple things. One, you have officially stopped being the captain of your ship, because imagine this for a second. Imagine Russell Crowe, and what was that movie? What was that movie? Where Russell Crowe was like the captain of a ship. I can't remember. They went to like Galapagos, I think, or something. I don't know. Anyway, so imagine Russell Crowe suddenly turning into, I don't know, the guy from The Office, okay, who runs around the office undermining everybody else's authority, even though he's supposed to be the boss. Okay, so he's like constantly like monkeying with his employees. Okay, imagine the captain of a ship undermining the first mate. That's absurd. Okay, it is absurd. No captain of a ship should be doing that. And when we put it in those terms, it seems totally absurd, right? Well, the problem is that this is like a really common dynamic in a marriage where these men run around and try to like bond with their children on the sly by being subversive towards their wives. This is a huge problem, men. If you're doing this in your marriage, like you're skating down a dangerous path. Okay, so it's something that you're going to need to address, and it's going to take a lot of guts because you're going to have to address your wife and her anxieties and stuff like that. But trust me when I say this, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Women are not attracted to men who are not the captain of their ship. They're not attracted to them. Women are attracted to strong, resilient men who can command a situation. I don't mean bossy men. I don't mean violent men. I don't mean mean men. I mean strong, confident men that can command a family and command their ship. All women are attracted to men like this. Every last one of them. Every feminist, every trad wife, every woman that's right in between, like all of those women all want a man who is strong and confident and can lead his family. No one wants a man who is a goofball who subverts his wife. No one wants that. Okay, so if your wife is driving you crazy, if she is being demeaning, if she is overly uptight, if she never lets you have any fun, if she does all this stuff, you need to address that head on. You're going to have a conflict. I hate to tell you, but it's going to be a conflict. And you're going to have to kind of wrestle away control over the household from her. And the way that you're going to do this is to get her on your side with that. Okay. So you're going to sit down with her and you're going to talk to her about it. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Anyway, so the other way that I see a lot of men responding to this dynamic is to simply withdraw from the family. So they come home and their wife is like, and the men are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go in my man cave and go play video games. Okay. And they just don't do anything. Like they just withdraw. Maybe they earn a paycheck, but they basically like give up trying in their household. And I know if you're a man that is doing this, you're like, you don't understand. My wife is such a bee with an itch. And it's like, well, dude, you married that woman. So I don't know what to, like, you married her. Was she a total bitch when you guys got married? Or did this change once you had children? And if she was a total, if she was really bratty when you, like, why did you marry her? Like, it's not that I don't have sympathy for that situation, but I think you need to, take a step back and like realize that God gave you an extreme position of authority over your family, and you don't get to just pretend that your wife doesn't exist and hide from her because she has a difficult personality. Okay. Now, why is this dynamic so bad for family life? Well, the first reason is it causes a lot of tension between the parents, obviously. But the second is that your children will see their father undermining their mother's authority, and they will then believe that they get to undermine their mom's authority and also their dad's authority and also their teacher's authority and the police and every other authority figure that they come across. These sorts of children will sort of float around until they find an authority figure that they trust, and that's going to be a strong personality. And that person with a strong personality may not be somebody that you want your children being influenced by. So I want you to keep that in mind. You really want your children to go to you and your wife or you and your husband. You guys need to be the primary source of comfort for your children, the primary source of all things moral. You need to be the primary person that your kids go to for advice. And in a healthy family, you're going to surround yourself with other adults that you trust your children to go to. Okay, these would be your godparents or, family members and things like that, but like friends that you really trust. But your children, they should be going to you for advice and not to some, random person with a strong personality. But if the dad has this sort of subversive behavior in the family, and honestly, if the mother does too, it's just that this is a dynamic that I think is a little bit more common with men than it is with women. If your kids see dad as like this weakling that can't even stand up to mom and has to become one of the shipmates and no longer the captain, like the first mate took over. And the captain just kind of gave up and was like, okay, now I'm going to go wash the deck, but do it badly to like piss off the first mate. Like that's kind of what you're doing. Okay. So how well, okay, sorry. I'm going to go back to like the effects that this would have on children. And so, yeah, your kids are going to, they're going to be, they're going to be kind of difficult kids. Honestly, they're going to be difficult. The school's going to complain about them. And if they don't have those kinds of behavioral difficulties, they could have a lot of anxiety because they don't know who's in charge at home, and it doesn't feel safe to them. And I know that this sounds a little bit extreme. You're like, how could my children feel unsafe because I go play video games and ignore my family, or I roll my eyes at my wife, or I walk through the house with muddy shoes and don't take them off even though I know that my wife really needs me to take off the shoes because she just washed the kitchen floor, or because I come home and like play with the kids playfully and undermine her silly rules. Well, because they don't know who's in charge, and they see you undermining their mom. Like, these are children, and any amount of undermining that happens in an authority structure in front of children will make the child think that there is nobody in control. If you have ever taught a classroom full of children, you know how incredibly important it is to maintain authority over them. It is of dire importance that these children respect and believe in the authority structures that are, in the classroom. And so this is especially true also in a family. Children, yeah, they see this as an opportunity to act up, and at the time it kind of feels fun, but it also creates kids that are, disobedient and also usually have a lot of anxiety and, other issues. So this is a very important dynamic for you to get right. And the reason I'm talking about this from a child's perspective, or for the raising of children, it's not that I don't think that it matters how married couples feel, but it kind of don't care how married couples feel. You're adults. Your feelings are, it's like whatever. Like, honestly, I'm just going to say that. Like, whatever, who cares how you feel about your spouse? This isn't about you. This is about your children. You are an adult. You've already been formed. You get to make your own decisions, and you don't get to victimize your children because you have poor social skills or you have poor skills when it comes to managing your family. That is not fair to your children. You brought those kids into the world, and it is your responsibility to provide them with the most stable and loving home you possibly can. So that's why I keep talking about children when it comes to this, and not talking about your feeling or your wife's feeling, because like, I just don't care how you feel, and I don't care how your wife feels. I really don't. I'm sorry. I know that sounds terrible, but like, look, I have stage 4 cancer, and I'm not sitting here mopey dopey woepy about like my stage 4 cancer. And if your wife is being a little bit bitchy to you, and your husband's being a little bit subservient to you, or subversive towards you, like, oh, big whoop. Like, honestly, big whoop. It's not about you, but it's really bad for the children. It's really bad for the children. And so that is why I'm talking about this, because I care about the formation of Catholic children. And yeah, I want people to be happily married, but I think people sometimes can be a little wimpy about this. Okay, marriage is not always happy. And so it's just like, get over it. Okay. So what are you going to do when, how are we going to fix this dynamic that is in place? This is a dynamic. Once you've gotten to the phase where dad or mom is undermining, like directly undermining the authority of the other one, and I don't mean just saying snotty comments occasionally, but I mean like literally disobeying the rules of the household. Once you get to that phase, you're probably going to need a little bit of professional help. But if you go to a marriage counselor, you need to make sure that they are a solid Catholic marriage counselor. You can't go to just like any Joe Schmo, because they don't understand hierarchies. And I would not even go to, say, a Christian marriage counselor, because, again, they don't understand the Catholic structure within a marriage, which is a little bit different than, evangelical Christians, I think, or even more fundamentalist Christians. Like, it's just a different dynamic. And also, Catholics don't believe in divorce. So you need to avoid a marriage counselor that's like, you should just walk away from this marriage, because you should never walk away from your marriage if you're a Catholic, if you can help it, unless you think that somebody is, if somebody's abusive or something like that, but like, or an alcoholic. But Catholic marriages, this is a very serious sacrament that you've participated in. Okay, so you might need to go see a counselor. If that's not an option for you, um, and you're the subversive spouse that's acting goofy and disobeying rules and or being a recluse and just refusing to participate in household stuff, or you're undermining your wife a lot, or your husband, I would really reflect on why you think that is appropriate behavior. And I would go into the way that you were raised, and I would think about the way that you have responded to authority in the past. If maybe you were the class clown, or if you were a kid who was less than, maybe you were a kid that had issues with authority in school, and just see, how do you generally respond to authority? And does it trigger something in you when you see your wife acting as an authority figure? And, look at that part of you and see if you can, or your husband, I'm sorry, because I know that wives do this too, but like, see what it is in you that bucks authority, and like why it is so difficult to approach your spouse in a respectful way, and why you feel like undermining your spouse is going to get done what you want to get done. The other thing that I would say is that you need to address any mental health concerns that maybe your spouse has. Your spouse might be suffering from anxiety, or your spouse might be suffering from depression, or, other problems that there could be something going on there. And that's why they're acting so difficult about house rules and things like that. The other thing I would do is to have very clear boundaries around who does what within a family. And so for, like, in my marriage, one thing, and we really don't have this dynamic. I'm going to say, like, my husband has never, ever, ever, ever undermined me in front of my children, and I've never undermined him. We both knew how incredibly important this was when we started having children. Like, we decided we were a unified front, and we'd like to say that we are both equally unfun. Like, we never, ever have ever disobeyed each other in front of our children. Like, if daddy says no more ice cream, then it's no more ice cream. And if mommy says, no, you can't have a cookie now, or if mommy says you have to do XYZ, like, my husband backs me up. Like, there's absolutely, this is nothing that we have ever done. But one thing that we do in our household that I think helps with this is we have very clear roles within our household. And so I am in charge of cleaning the house. I am in charge with like almost all of the child rearing decisions, as far as like which pediatrician we use, or, what kind of sort of overall, choices we make with the children, like little things like, we're going to cloth diaper the kids, or are we, how are we going to, like, what hospital are we going to give birth in, or what, that kind of stuff. So I am in charge of all of these like smaller decisions when it comes to the children. And of course we discuss this stuff together, but like, that's my wheelhouse. And then my husband is in charge of, all of the money. Like, he does all of that stuff. And then I am in, he earns all the money, and he also deals with all of that, and he deals with the yard work and whatever. So these are pretty typical structures that I think a lot of people have in their families. But I think if you are having these issues of, undermining each other, you might need to put up more, like, you literally need to sit down and plan, okay, who is in charge of this and who is in charge of that. And you might have to write that all down on paper, because, and then you need to give your spouse control in that area and not undermine them. Okay. And one thing I would also say, like, to dads out there, I think, and this is like specifically to dads, okay, one thing to keep in mind is your wife might seem like she's some uptight banshee all the time, but you may want to consider that maybe your wife has a little bit more knowledge about child rearing and also managing the home than you give her credit for. So, I know in my own family, like in my marriage, I know a lot about children. Like, I've worked with children. I have a lot of philosophies about children. I come from, like, my mother is a teacher. She's worked with children her whole life. Like, I was a nanny. I was totally baby obsessed before we had our own babies. Like, I was always babysitting, and I was always around children. I know a lot about kids. My husband isn't going to come in and be like, "What do you know about kids?" And I have seen men do this where they're like, "My wife is freaking out because, the like she wants to put the baby in like a rear facing car seat for too long, and I just think that that's turning my kids off." Like, I've literally seen men do this, and it's like, have you watched a crash test video about like car seats? And so I think there's a place where like men need to recognize that their wife actually may have a little bit more knowledge in certain areas, and just go with what she wants you to do. If you think what she's asking is totally unreasonable, then it's fine to confront her about that. It's fine to get her help. It's fine to be like, "Girl, I think you're like going nuts." Okay. But you got to get in there and like actually be supportive and be like, "Hey, like, I think this is, I'm worried about this. Like, I don't like what this is doing to you. And I think that maybe this isn't great for our kids." Okay. I don't think that it generally gets to that point. And that I think that that's why men start to participate, and it's not always men, I know this, but like, that's why men start to participate in this subversion that goes on in their family. The other thing I wanted to say really quickly is that this subversion does not include a very normal dynamic that husbands and wives have, where wives tend to be a little bit more overprotective and men tend to be a little bit more pushy. What this looks like is like if you're going to go to a playground with your kids. Okay, this is like a common thing that happens in my family with my husband. Okay, where we go to a playground and I'm afraid that the toddler is climbing too high of a play structure, and my husband's like, "No, she's fine." And he'll give me this look like, "No, she's fine. Like, she can do this." And that is like this moment where it's like, okay, dad is taking over and dad is pushing the child towards higher goals, or kind of pushing the child towards greatness, which is a father's job. Fathers are supposed to challenge their children. That is not, in my mind, subverting me. That's dad taking over in that moment and being like, "Nope, like, I am taking over because I am going to push the kid to do something. I'm going to challenge them." Okay. Like, this happens at the pool a lot too, where like one of our kids will be learning how to swim and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they're going to drown." Like, "Ah." And my husband is just like, "Nope, swim, nope, swim, nope, swim." And he pushes them. And, if I had it my way, the kids would always be in floaties forever. They wouldn't, no, that's not true. I'm quite good about teaching my kids how to swim. But if I had it my way, I would be like way more cautious about stuff like that. And so there is a place where fathers are going to push their children, maybe athletically or with their grades and things like that, where the mom may have a little bit of a softer heart. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay. I am talking about undermining your spouse because you're mad at your spouse, undermining your spouse because you don't respect them, undermining them because you're afraid of a confrontation with them, and you're hoping that by undermining their behavior, eventually they'll give up. Okay. I know this was like a super long video. I did not mean this to be so long, but I hope that this helps somebody. And anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.